have Sandeep Srivastava with us. Sandeep is the director of product at Microsoft, and before that, he had a really amazing entrepreneur journey where he worked with companies like Shadi.com and few more amazing ventures. So, hi Sandeep, welcome to the show.
Hey Venk, glad to be here and happy to be talking to you and connecting to your audience.
Thanks very much. So, before we jump into the whole world of Microsoft and your startups, can you talk a little about your early days and maybe how IIT Bombay happened and then, everything? Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, this is my 25th year. That reminds me, this is like my silver anniversary of work, really. And um, the path to IIT Bombay was, uh, I'll say, I think, was a destiny. It was supposed to happen. But before that, I will also go back into how I landed in IIT Bombay because it was an interesting journey. Um, when I was growing up, I grew up in this city called Lucknow, and it was a pretty limited exposure city. My aspirations were built by observing little experiences around me, but at the same time, I had the unbounded desire to change the world. Um, I grew up with a mindset of independence and empowerment. And my father was a government servant, always obedient, mostly traveling, obeying orders from his bosses and ministers, and giving it his best. I didn't like the feeling of being separated as a family because I was a student, he was mostly away. On the other hand, I saw my uncle who flourished running an event management company where he was empowered and he employed a battery of staff who, though financially may not be as rewarded, but it to me seemed like it gave him a far better sense of fulfillment. Uh, so academically, I was brilliant. I I could get through mathematics Olympiad and
mhm,
Singapore scholarship and like you name it. I was doing well, right? So and I was also expert in computers because I got an early exposure to computers during that time. So I was always desired to get into the city of dreams or as we call it Maya Nagri, right?
yeah,
In UP it is called Bombay, right? In Mumbai, Bombay,
mhm,
in today's parlance. But entrepreneurship at the time didn't exist in my dictionary. So though Mumbai was known as the industrial hub, financial hub, at the same time it was notorious for its underworld, wherein I think 1995 or so bomb blast had shattered the nation. So it was an easy choice for me, but was a
yeah,
very hard choice for my parents. They wanted me to go to Kanpur and serve the nation as a bureaucrat, um, or worst case to Delhi, right? But they never dreamt of Bombay. So when I expressed that desire to them, they were not very supportive. But as luck would have had it, I got a rank that helped me choose IIT Bombay Computer Science, and I joined IIT in 1997. All my energy was directed towards manifestation of this dream, and somehow the destiny came together to help me land where I wanted to land.
yeah,
Um, now, like most of the times in life, you make choices and not decision, and those choices are guided by your past karma and your purusharth or the effort that you put in, right? And a lot of it is guided by the superpower that is around you. So as I landed at the IIT, there were a couple of defining moments. I remember the first or the second day. We were late, by the way. In 1997, if you remember, there was a paper leak of JE, and the students had to appear for two exams because the first exam was annulled and the second exam happened after 1.5 months. So our batch was delayed. So we got into IIT then at a very accelerated pace, and the faculty advisor, Mr. Amitabh Sanyal, he made the class sit down and he said, "Who, like, take a piece of paper and write down who do you want to be in 4 years."
mhm,
And it didn't take me like a minute. Like others were thinking, looking here and there, trying to copy each other's paper. I just wrote it down on paper. I remember writing on a paper saying that I want to be a businessman, right? And this was like 1997. 1997 is the freshy year, and when you are in the freshy year in IIT, you're all put in one college, one hostel. and in the second year onwards, you get allocated to a permanent hostel. Um, so I'm telling you this story because this is a second inflection that happened. When the IIT hostels were being allocated, I was retained in hostel 3, but there was a super senior of mine who didn't like it because he wanted to retain another guy who was better in athletics than me, and he would have helped the hostel win the or retain the GC trophy. I don't know if you watched this movie
Yeah.
Chichore.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
exactly my story. And there was this guy PC. I don't even know what his full name was. Like he was like tall and dominating, and I was like away from my city. I didn't know how to survive in this Maya Nagri, and I was being negotiated out of this hostel. I relented. I moved to hostel 4, which is called HIV in IIT, and I didn't realize that the allocation that year were done in a way where hostel 4 had no CS undergrad. I was only CS undergrad, and that way
Oh.
I got isolated and contained in hostel 4. It was like maybe a wrong choice that I had made. Um, that was the time when I met like bunch of people there who shaped my entrepreneurial journey.
Mhm.
Because when you get put in this kind of a difficult setup, you get a lot of sympathy, but you also get a lot of diversity, right? So I
True.
remember meeting like some of the South Bombay guys who didn't understand what hum is, right? I mean, I come from Lucknow where I is referred as hum, and I'll say hum
Yeah.
again. They were like, I can see you. Where are the others?
That's
Right? Um,
yeah.
and then there was this other guy who was like in those days there used to be these direct admission for students abroad. So there was this guy
Mhm.
Roshan De Silva. He was my co-founder in my second venture. So I met him there. In fact, he wooed me into kind of entrepreneurship because I did not know what doing a startup really is. And as we like further talk about my startup journey, I think I'll call out how this like coincidence really helped.
Okay.
Um, Now, subsequently in the IITs, and since we are in the IIT early days, I think this will help. I think I all my life I had been a winner, so I didn't know how to fail. And the IIT dazzle, especially when you're away from home, and the life in IIT really starts at 10 p.m. and goes on to like 5 a.m. or so. So the IIT dazzle took over, and I flunked in the course which is called Maths 102, which is probability course.
Mhm.
Um, I was the class representative of my batch, right? And the because of the 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. culture I talked about, I would be
Yeah.
awake the whole night and I would go and sleep on the first bench in the class. Every other professor would tolerate me, but there was this one professor. His name was Mr. Professor Aladi. He couldn't tolerate this. He saw it as like a clash of like some sort of a uh,
Principles, I guess.
principles. Yeah, and he flunked me. So never ever in his career he had failed anyone, right? But
Yeah.
this was the first time he flunked me by, and he could not even give me one grace. In IIT, professors typically give you grace mark, but
Mhm.
because of me, one third of the batch failed.
Oh, yeah.
I
Got
was the guy who was on the
ends up.
borderline, right? Uh, but then I decided to stay put in the like my parents obviously were not happy, so I decided to stay put in the campus during the summers. I came across like while this was because I had to clear the exam, so I was in the campus, so might as well just do some work. So I assisted with writing 2 3 research paper,
Mhm.
and I also found some my lifelong mentor as I did it, who is a professor at IIT Bombay, Mr. Soman Chakravarti. But at the same time, what I did was, and this is the fascinating part. I mean, this will connect the dots. I wrote a bot while I
Okay.
was like free during my times at IIT, and that went viral in IITs.
Mhm.
What was this bot? This bot was essentially going out on the internet, figuring out quiz sites, answering quizzes, and gaining rewards. That was the time when there were sites like Hangama.com, contest to win, which will um, try to gain the eyeball because your
Mhm.
valuation was a function of eyeball. So they were so happy with this campus called IIT Bombay because all of a sudden they were getting so many eyeballs.
Yeah.
Every students on their computer was running this, and then postman every morning would kind of get uh, or fetch bags full of goodies to the hostels of IIT Bombay. So there was a phenomena going on.
Got it.
But then what happened was this brought down the chicken neck of 2 Mbps proxy server that runs the internet at IIT Bombay. I was the internet secretary, and I was asked to investigate.
Mhm.
Uh, and like, imagine you are being asked to investigate when you know what you really are the culprit. So I admitted to my mistake. I mean, I had to be honest there. Um, there was a professor named Professor Siva. He was very furious.
Mhm.
Um, but by this time, I'd got like famous at IIT
Right.
because they knew who was the creator behind this bot. And I met this friend of mine, Chirag.
Mhm.
Chirag introduced me to the founders of Shadi.com.
Yeah.
So this is how the dots connected. Uh, and I met Chirag. He introduced me to Anupam Mittal, Pooja Mittal, Anand Mittal, the trio who were the brains behind the Shadi.com. They did not have the tech strength.
Yeah.
Because of the tech reputation I had gained and the reference I had from Chirag, they trusted me to kind of take on as the tech partners for the venture that they were on. But after meeting them, I got hooked because I realized that, man, there's something going on here, and this really might be my opportunity to realize my vision of doing the business.
Yeah. Now that we are on Shadi.com, we have to talk about the scale which you handled during that time. I guess you mentioned that around 7 million shadis happened, if I'm not wrong.
Now there are,
Uh,
I think, 16 million or 17 million. So
yeah. So, like, if you could talk about, like, to have, to build a system which handle that kind of request and, that kind of load, just when you are actually in college, how was it and how was the experience, like, overall, if you could talk?
yeah, see, as a college student, not used to building commercial products,
Yeah.
right? So, most of the time you would write projects, you would hack things together, but you would really not build things for mainstream large scale adoption. But the one thing that was happening when I was working with the Shadi.com crew was that Shadi.com was not the only e-commerce service that we were working on. We had Polyester Online, Ethnic Resources, Taj Gifts, and Sagai.com. So Shadi.com back then was known as Sagai.com.
Got it.
Uh, and uh, the I mean, this thing of iterative product development, agile product development really came in as a methodology much later. But if you ask the
Mm.
startup guy, they'll tell you that that's their way of survival, because that's how the software gets built. So since we did not get the traffic surge, like the hockey stick traffic on the day one,
Mhm.
the first stage was about essentially building the system. The second stage was about kind of scaling it. Well, I remember making a bet on LAMP, which is Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP as the technology stack for it. But later, I remember shifting over to PostgreSQL because I realized that for us to kind of scale and get distributed and create the fault tolerance, we'll have to go beyond that. Um, like, thankfully, I was the only techie guy, so I had some autonomy in the way these things could be done.
Yeah.
But it was like the fascinating journey of making the shift from being a college grad to being a techie who could build a product for the mainstream. Um,
Yeah.
so that was one. Second, I'll also say I think it's important to stay connected with your customer. Like in case of Sagai.com, I think amongst the four ventures that I just talked about, the B2 combination of B2B, B2C, C2C. Sagai.com was C2C really because consumer to consumer. Um, E-commerce wasn't picking up as well. The only e-commerce that was kind of proven or slightly working was IRCTC. That was
Mhm.
government run, right? The payment instruments were not established. People didn't know how to kind of make payments to an online service.
Correct.
I think the realization during that time was that look, our real competition is really not like the people are not used to trusting this online service to do matchmaking or marriage broking, right? We realize our real competition are all these tier 2 tier 3 cities, marriage bureau companies or marriage broker individuals who would go family to family and make the connection. So
Correct.
the shift of strategy was to shift from online to a hybrid setup where we would establish these Shadi.com offline store which would
Oh.
leverage the online database, but essentially establish trust with a face-to-face connection. Also, collect payment in this offline setup. So that was one shift. The other shift was to move away from, and this was like Anupam's brilliant idea. I think
Mm-hmm.
he took all the money he has, and he has talked about it in multiple forums. He took all it, and like I didn't know all of this. I could only connect the dot after hearing this story from him in much later. So
Yeah.
he took all his money and he bought the domain Shadi.com, right? That's when really the hockey stick growth happened, and that's when the product market fitment happened. And Shadi.com really is one of the ventures, and not many people know about it. That was never venture funded. It's a
Yeah.
proper dhanda, right? I mean, dhanda means it's cash positive, with a very positive cash flow that does not need any venture funding or venture validation to kind of scale the business. And those are like in an Indian context, those are the real kind of businesses that really stands the test of time. This is like 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
Shadi.com is still around. People are still getting born. They're
Correct.
getting married. They're still trusting Shadi.com. Um,
True.
so I think that was a journey of scale.
Amazing. I got a very new insight. I was not aware about this hybrid system and everything. It's amazing. While we are talking about VC funds, you actually built I think one of the first startup which was VC funded. So if we could talk a little about that as well while we are talking about it.
Yeah, so like these were the times when the dot com
Boom
were
was happening.
booming,
Yeah.
and a couple of phenomena going on. Dot com were booming. Y2K was around, so Indian IT industry was growing. Because Y2K for the young audience, I'll tell you, is the time when the date shifted from 1999 to 2000, and
Okay.
all of a sudden, see, date used to be stored in four, like the fidelity of four, with the DD and MM, dates and month,
Hmm.
always. So then there was this scare that when the date shifts from 1999 to 2000, all of a sudden we would be set 100 years behind. So a lot of
Yeah.
IT consulting company came and they fixed the airline software, banking software, insurance software, ticketing software to make sure that as humanity we could easily switch. So a lot of that was going on. And there was a visionary professor at IIT Bombay, Professor DB Phatak. So he was looking at creating an incubator in IIT Bombay. And they were believers, they were non-believers. I think I remember a lot of professors were against it because they couldn't digest the notion that students were coming to IITs not to study but to kind of do ventures. They
Yeah.
could also not digest the notion that students would deal with money, and they would draw salaries, and in some cases the salaries would be higher than the money that professors make. Right, so it's a very
Correct.
like a I think very
Cultural
strong
shift.
philosophical shock or a debate to be had, right? Um, so when and this is where the dot gets connected, Mayank. The story that I told you about the bot,
Yeah.
essentially, and the guy I met up with earlier, Roshan, right? We came together. There was this venture. Eureka is the name of the competition that happens at IIT Bombay, and this was like the first or the second instance of it. I think this was the first instance, and we decided to participate in the business plan competition. And Roshan, like one thing about these DASA candidates is that like they're very soft, they're like very sorted, strong personality, good communication skill. So he
Yeah.
was the one who did all the I was a good techie, he was a good guy at communication. So he wrote the business plan, and the soul of that business plan was productivity at the fingertips of the mobile users. But this was the time when there was no smartphone. We still
Hmm.
had touch phone, and there was this new HTML kind of interface, which was called WML, wireless markup language. And the protocol, because the bandwidth between phone and the IS and the telecom provider was very limited, so it used to operate on this protocol called wireless access protocol, WAP protocol. So all
Okay.
we said was, look, the same bot would exist on the server, and then people will be able to run these bots in order to get their stuff done from the mobile phone. And we had bunch of use cases, and the first use case was this quizzing bot. But you can imagine, right? You can use this to kind of request for services, check for information, book tickets. And we said these bots essentially will be packaged as a technology we call MIDAS, Midas Information Delivery and Aggregation Service was the full form of
Okay.
MIDAS, and that was our IP. And then we kind of showcased this to the VCs. There were a bunch of VCs sitting there. One of the VCs was like pretty visionary. He latched onto it. Within that same night, I remember sitting in an auto going from IIT Bombay to Santa Cruz, meeting the a panel of decision makers, and they immediately kind of wrote the check, and we had the money. The challenge was I was not mentally prepared that we'll have the money in a day, and I'll have to shift from being a student to being an entrepreneur. Um, so the idea had merits. That much I can tell you.
Yeah.
I'll also tell you, telecom as an industry we knew was very regulated, so it was a hard industry to penetrate, and it's easier to sell to consumer
Mhm.
than trying to sell to businesses, right? And you can name or you can count the number of telecom on your finger. There are not as many telecoms in the world. uh, so the first few wins were hard, but I'll tell you the star power of IIT. Like saying that we are a startup from IIT Bombay was
Yeah.
saying like we are a startup from MIT or Stanford in US, right? So
Correct.
it immediately opened up door, and then there were a couple of connections that were orchestrated by alumni and the VCs. Um, so we won Hutchinson. So Hutchinson is now Vodafone Idea now. So Vodafone, like Hutchinson was the early days of Vodafone. So Hutchinson and BPL Telecom were the first two customer showcase customer for us. And then what we did was, I remember going to Hong Kong. There was a International Telecom Union (ITU) conference, and that what happens in Hong Kong, and we showcased this technology here and there. And all of a sudden, we got a lot of these inquiries because the IP was unique and the problem was real, right? Um, and immediately we got traction with Singapore Telecom, Bahrain Telecom, Kenya Cell, and I remember signing a deal with this company which still exists, Zenith Technology. They signed up as a reseller and tech partner for implementation, and we were on the roll, right? My co-founder Roshan, I'll say, is a very smart salesperson. He's still an entrepreneur. He does a like he's a he'll be happy to hear me admiring him because uh, when you go through a startup, I think as founder, co-founding, you do fight a lot of battles. But
For
he was
sure.
a very smart salesperson.
Mhm.
Uh, now, I'll also tell you, I think this part was easy. I think the journey ahead was a bit difficult. Um, we filed a patent for Midas, by the way. This was a server which you can remotely invoke bots to get things done. Agility was needed. Our product was always kind of evolving. That gave telecom the reason to be on an annual maintenance contract. So I think the product market fitment was a function of the business model is what I'll say.
Mhm.
So I think we had to figure out a business model that works for us. So we structured the business model as a one-time setup cost, a cost per transaction. Because cost per
Okay.
transaction was win-win for them as well as for us, because the more valuable we make the service, the more transaction there will be and more revenue they make and more cut we get, right? And then we
Correct.
also built an AMC, right? So we kept adding capabilities based on what we heard from the telecom and our users. This was going as expected, and hence uh, I made a decision to bypass the second round of funding. Maybe this was a blunder in hindsight I did in IIT, but I was used to the Shadi.com model where if you have a cash flow positive, my reasoning was we don't need funding. Until the September 11 happened. This was September of 2001. I was out of IIT, and we realized that the VC's money dried up, and the customers pulled their hands away, given the tight liquidity and the recessionary environment. Um, and this was the time when I had to make the hard choice of kind of ramping down mises and figuring out my next step in the career. So yeah, so this part was hard because by this time I should have been in a job or in a foreign university,
Yeah.
but I was jobless, right? And uh, I was also driven by this motivation to kind of figure out uh, how I can create a scaled business in a setup like India. So I was in a phase where you can say my like a interval of a movie, right?
Yeah.
Half writing part was done. Second half, I was yet to figure out.
Yeah, you were in a figuring out phase. And the fact that you actually built ventures like, Shadi.com and Misers. And then after that, when this kind of thing happened, of course, you might have went through a lot of difficulties. But then after that, I guess you had one more venture, right? So if that was a Algo trading venture. So I know that
Yeah,
you did a job for a very small period during that
yeah,
time, but after that you did your startup. So how that happened again?
yeah. Yeah, so very interesting inflection from Mises to Mintus. Mintus was my quant trading firm,
Yeah,
right? And in between was this September 11 time frame. So September 11 time frame, very few people know that I had a job offer from Deloitte, from the campus, because my parents were very conservative. They saw me doing entrepreneurship, but somehow they were like, and I got advices to drop out from
yeah,
the college. But my middle class parents asked me to complete my study. The only grace they gave me was, um, do it with mediocre grades.
yeah,
We're not going to. We are not asking you to for the moonshot, but at least finish your education. Um, Now, I in parallel appeared for campus placement. There was this company, Deloitte, who came for the campus. They knew I was an entrepreneur, and there was this very kind and graceful director at Deloitte, Mr. Raj Joshi. When he gave me the offer, he said, um, that he knew that there was only a very little chance for me to take up the job. He would still kind of prefer to give me a chance as opposed to leaving me out, because he believed that I could probably add something to Deloitte. So
yeah.
as a backup option, I always had Deloitte,
Hmm.
but my inquiry about doing the scaled business was not done yet. Um, so also, so that was one. Second one was, I think, if you notice from shadi.com, I think shadi.com I left after I won the business plan competition. And I should talk about why did I leave this, because I was chased by Pooja, and she'll hate me for it. She sent her person hunting me at the hostel, and I avoided the person and Pooja, and they called for some time. But then finally I relented that no, I'll not be able to do two things. I'll have to kind of step out. But the real reason was, I really wanted, like, I was kicked by high tech.
Yeah,
I was not getting the kick with this lamp stack based internet e-commerce thing. Like, to tell you frankly, I would have never done a startup to sell chai and samosa and e-commerce online, because that is not where I got the kick.
yeah,
So that was the reason why I made the shift from Shadi.com to Mises. Maybe, like, in hindsight, if I had stuck with Shadi.com, I would have probably made my billions by now already. Um, but high tech is where I knew that my calling was, and I also knew that I had to figure out the right marriage of technology with the domain. We were in the recession, and I was trying to figure out how do you build recession proof businesses, right? And in that search I came across this short stint. I worked with a company called Zycus,
yeah.
which worked on AI based spend proofing consulting for
Okay.
Fortune 500 companies. So all they were doing was they were using AI, they were analyzing the spend data and the procurement data of these Fortune 500 companies, helping them save $500 million. And they were taking like 10%, 15% as the consulting charge in doing that. I realized this is like a fascinating place to be in, because this is a perfect marriage of finance with the
Exactly.
AI, and they had like a huge human factory. Like today we talk about scale.ai, the human factory that powers the LLMs of the planet. They
Hmm.
already had it figured out, and this I'm talking about like what, 20 years back. So working with the company, I realized that look, technology when it is applied to maybe a domain which could be um, as recession proof as finance, and maybe
Yeah,
where the clever mix is. And as I said, I was bankrupt twice. I did not want to borrow money from my parents or my brothers,
yeah,
so to contain my cost I moved to Surat. I stayed there for like 6 months. I was doing consulting for my friends, and while I built prototype for my next venture. So my next venture was quant trading. Now, quant trading by this time was pretty big in US, but there were no signs of it in a place like India. India was still struggling with the scams of Ketan Parekh, Harshad Mehta.
True.
Like NSE was the primary exchange. BSE was not as big then. What I did was I again wrote my prototype to uh, do a proof of concept on a system that could trade in the market autonomously by deploying money and creating alpha or return. Um, I built this prototype, and then like I had to really find if there were any takers for it. So I went to Bombay. I met up with my old VC friends. I met up with. They introduced me to a bunch of investors, traders who could potentially be interested in this, and I found a like a I found a partner, right? And um this was really the place where technology could provide a leverage in this fast paced industry such as quant trading or high frequency trading. This was also where the business was about bringing the money, so there was no question about putting the mouth uh, where the money is. And it in a way was an immediate calling for me to come in, work with a partner, and create a system that could help open the doors and the regulatory environment for quant trading in India. um, I had like bunch of learning along the way, and maybe I could share that with you as well, Mayank, with you and your audience.
For sure.
This was the early days, and this software was also in a prototype state, so it kind of took a while to get it to a spot where it could really scale and helped create the scale of leverage that could really be of any practical significance. But
Mhm.
more than technology, I think my real challenges were really the uh, people that I was dealing with. I mean, I don't know if you have read these two books which have recently come out. One of them is written by uh, uh, Miss Sucheta Dalal. Uh,
Okay.
she also is the one who exposed the Harshad Mehta scam. So the book is called Market Mafia,
Okay.
and there's another book on the same subject called Absolute Power. It talks about how this whole setup in the finance industry is actually very hard because of the lack of regulation, lack of oversight, lack of know-how, and too much of autonomy and power in the hand of specific set of people. So that's what I dealt with. But essentially, I scaled through the system. I worked with the people. One thing I'll also say is I think all through in the business setup, I realized that there's a lot of in an Indian context. I
Mhm.
think we as civilization struggle with trust. It's very hard for humans to trust human because there's only two ways to do it. Either as civilization we trust each other, or there is like strong law and enforcement to force a system that trusts. I think the Indian diaspora has a different way of dealing with it. Like for example, you'll see Jain community, Parsi community, Marwadi community, Banya community. They know how to work with each other, how to bet
Yeah.
on each other, and how to leverage each other in order to scale the business. But then, as soon as an outsider kind of tries to work in such a setup, it's a very hard kind of a network to penetrate into. So I went through some of that. Um then I think I also realized that in a place where money is involved, there's no easy way to build a business model as a tech provider because the power is in the hands of the people who have the money. And in that process, I realized I think IP I had kind of got compromised. And it, again, in an Indian kind of a setup, um, very hard to protect your IP.
Yeah.
Once you lose IP, you can keep chasing those people. You can keep chasing the the legal system, but it's very hard to kind of get to a point where you can protect your IP. But thankfully, I could get to a point where Mintus as a system could handle like 2,000 crore Indian rupees per day in turnover. Um, and uh, that
Amazing.
was, I mean, I'll say after Shadi.com, that was like my big scale of technology that I feel good about. Yeah.
Got it. But like, I wanted to ask you one question because you have worked in a venture where it was not tech oriented, as well as you have worked in a very deep tech companies as well. What was your so even Piyush Goyal recently commented on the Indian ecosystem, right? That
Right.
where he said like people are chasing money and there's no innovation happening in India, and that made me realize when you just talked about the power of money, that makes me realize that it's not that Indians are not trying to do the innovation, but the money is in these kind of startups. So how do you think India can come out of this and actually build something which is innovative and actually backed by private ventures and not just government bodies? So yeah.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. A lot of the scaled population scale technologies today are government facilitated.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the Microsoft reviews I had, I presented one of the possibilities of working on or leveraging ONDC in order to scale our business in India. And exec there just jumped out of his chair. He said government has no business of being and facilitating technology, because this notion is kind of very alien outside India.
Yeah.
That think like Aadhaar, think like Covin, think like UPI and ONDC is really being built by government.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I think there's not a lack of intent. There's not a lack of brain in India. I
Correct.
think there there's a lack of system that we as entrepreneurs struggle with. First of all, I think IP protection, IP monetization is very hard in India. A lot of these scaled technologies and entrepreneurship is actually created on the basis of IP.
Correct.
Um, the second thing I'll say is I think a lot of these startups even today, if you, I'll not name the startup, but if you see, I mean, we are in an era, and we've always been in an era in last 20 years. It's very hard to kind of take the ethics of the founders at
Yeah.
face value. I think there's a thin line between legality and illegality, and most people actually figure out ways to circumvent it, as opposed to kind of build a system that is set up to scale naturally. So many like startups fudge their balance sheet. So many startups prefer to kind of uh, show the scale on paper, not really in terms of reality. So I'll say IP protection, ethics. Third, I'll say is I think obviously, I mean, we have to figure out ways to kind of retain our people. But retention is easy if there's an environment to kind of sustain it. One, like I remember one of my mentors telling me that the only way to kind of enable talent is to not focus. Sorry, enable innovation is to not focus on innovation, but essentially to remove the detractors of innovation. These I'll say is the detractors of innovation. So
Got
I
it.
said IP protection. Second, I said ethics. Third, I'll say is community lock trust network. I think this community lock network will only help build organizations like Tata's and Ambani's,
Yeah.
because they build they are generational, and they essentially build a lot of the business which are built within a community, but
Mm.
it does not create a network in which a network of entrepreneurs, a network of kind of companies really flourish. So I think we have to get out of that community lock trap, which is why I think a strong legal system, very with a very strong turnaround uh, of uh, of these cases that get logged in these systems, needs to be facilitated. I mean, I was reading this case study about Singapore. The reason why Singapore is because they actually focus on this on a very strong legal system, on a very strong constitutional framework in order to nurture the entrepreneurs and the organizations.
Got it. Great answer. So now, till now, we have talked about your entrepreneur journey, but then Microsoft happened, and you recently completed 20 years at Microsoft, right? So, like, if you could explain, like, I would ask just one question, but if you could explain your whole journey at Microsoft, uh, in I know it's difficult to explain in few sentences, but how you see your personal career growth and how you see Microsoft growing over the years, and how Microsoft grew in India, because you were the part of the team who actually started IDC in my Noida. So if you could talk about all these things. uh,
Yeah, and I think 20 years. I remember when my hiring manager he hired me. He said, "I'm not. I'm like very much like Raj Joshi from Deloitte." He said, um, "I don't believe you're going to be around more than 6 months." And look, 20 years I'm still around. Um, and the reason why I'm around also is like I think very purpose driven, because when I joined Microsoft, I knew I was why I was joining Microsoft.
mhm,
Um, I knew I could build product, I could build technology. I think I'll tell you where I was failing. I was failing in creating scaled businesses,
mhm,
and knowing and betting on people who can help create scaled outcomes, right? See, so I knew technology, I did not know business and people. So I wanted to know how to build billion-dollar businesses.
correct.
And there's no company on the face of earth that knows how to build billion-dollar businesses. They've taken like simple products and
Yeah.
build billion-dollar scale businesses across the world. Um, so I started with two startup product units in Microsoft. The first one was OneCare, which was an antivirus, PC maintenance, backup software. When that OneCare was the first software as services product that scaled up to become close to 10 billion US dollar business called Windows Defender today. Um,
Oh.
it's to scale and persistence for Microsoft to grow it from a startup into where it is today.
Mhm,
Second one was called Office Live, and Office Live became Office 365. This is like around 50 billion business as of today. So both of them over the last 20 years really proved out to move from a startup into scale businesses. And I saw
right.
them very closely. I had my like little parts there, but I really saw them very closely on how these product units became from a startup to scaled billion-dollar outcomes. 20 year has been about impact, uh, scaled impact. I'll say. I think that's what keeps me motivated. Second is the connection. I think one thing that this kind of a place gives you is an opportunity to connect with very smart set of people, learn from them, and grow yourself across the dimension of product, people, and business. Um,
Yeah.
when like in the three like in the 20 years I saw that three very fundamental things changed about Microsoft. The first one was growth mindset. I think you may have heard about it. When Satya came, he brought in this mindset called growth mindset,
Yeah.
and that was a game changer, because before that Microsoft was more about know it all. You come
Mhm,
up with a question, I know it or not, I'll cook up a question, cook up an answer, and
right.
I'll prove to the world that I'm the smartest person on the planet.
Mhm,
uh, and that was like a very uh, I'll say that was the death spiral culture that we were on.
mhm,
Second thing that changed was adaptive software development. In the olden era, Office as a product used to take like 2 years or 3 years to kind of ship release by release, and we realized we were in a culture that was so rooted in the past, so much like so rooted in complacency. Startups were showing up and they were kind of outsmarting us because they were
faster.
shipping weekly. So that changed. Third thing that happened was freedom to be yourself. And basically, this is about essentially not trying to fit into a type A personality where you are aggressive and you behave like one a set role model in Microsoft. I think Microsoft execs are known for, or were known for, kind of throwing chairs in exec reviews and shouting at each other and those sort of things.
Yeah.
We went through a cultural shift where you bring yourself as you are and love what you do, right? Which means I started taking pride in who I was. I was like, I'm I'm very different from, and I used to consider myself very different from the role model or the success model in Microsoft. But I feel very comfortable in my skin, being in
Mhm,
Microsoft, working here, taking the bet, speaking my mind, and making sure I do it in a way which is like culturally attuned to Microsoft. So these three things I'll say is essentially the places where Microsoft got the best leverage. As I saw the journey of Microsoft in the last 20 years. You also asked me The question on uh, scaling Microsoft here in IDC, right?
Yeah.
Let me talk a bit about that as well. And maybe before I go there, maybe I'll also call out. Let me do the contrast between the startup and Microsoft, because that also
Mm.
was a bit that stood out for me.
Yeah.
Um, so when you are in a startup, you are an entrepreneur. So you have unlimited risk and you have unlimited upside. When you get into a place like Microsoft, you have
Yeah.
limited risk because your downside is protected, but at the same time you have limited upside as well, because you essentially are operating in a system where you create scale impact in a systematic environment and help the organization scale. So that's a fair bit of a difference. I mean, depending on who you are, will define how much you love this, how much you leverage this setup. I've always stayed in an environment which is always on the cutting edge in an entrepreneurial kind of a setup, even in a setup like Microsoft, which is where I got the good balance between these two. A contrast between a startup and an enterprise. But at the foundation of this essentially is your being in an organization. And I've seen in my career that there are two kinds of people in a job. There are soldiers and then there are commandos.
Yeah.
Uh, and soldiers are the one who operate within established system, focus on execution, reliability, scale. They are the one who help create scale system. Commandos are the one who break new ground, innovate, and take risks. So there's
Yeah.
space for both of them. I think as a entrepreneur, I've always loved to be a commando, but I'll say I think 90% of an organization really is soldier. So you have to find what your calling is, and there is a pro and con of being in a startup versus being in an enterprise.
Yeah.
Obviously, there is a structure, there is a playground that an enterprise comes with, and you have to operate within that. If you have to go beyond that, there are limits to how much you can go to, because enterprise will not go beyond its playground or a business model. So I think those are the things I'll call out.
Yeah.
Um, Um, yeah, so the second part was about scaling Microsoft in IDC. So I was a techie always, right? So
Yeah.
I thought I loved the job. I would never take any detour from this. Um, but somewhere along the way, this opportunity came along where I moved from being a techie to taking on the role of chief of staff, and then taking on the role of chief operating officer in Microsoft India Development Center. Um, I didn't know what the role was. So when my leadership pulled me up, I really thought about what's in it for me. I knew that A, there was a lot of learning. B, there was an opportunity to work with the leaders whom I could get an opportunity to build a relationship with. But the third, which was the most fascinating, was I would get to look at the world top down,
Yeah.
and that's an opportunity you don't get working in the trenches as an employee in one corner of the organization. So I lapped on to that opportunity. Um, and like this phase of chief of staff COO was away from technology for a bit, but it was the most uncomfortable and most rewarding journey at the same time. I say uncomfortable because this was like being a techie, being an introverted. I was never used to kind of getting in and operating in such a public facing and um, limelight customer facing role. So
Yeah.
it took me kind of a bit of a transition to settle into that role. But I'll tell you what was the game changer.
Mm.
Um, I chatted with Rajiv, who was my manager, and he's the managing director. And I formally accepted the title of chief of staff. Like before me, there were people who came in into the rotation role. They were never had the courage to kind of publicly accept the title. So I said, I'm complete with my role as a product leader. I will be the chief of staff. Publicly, I said, I'm the chief of. Before that, they would say, oh, I'm still the product manager. I'm doing this side job. No, I said, I'm the chief of staff. And then I kind of made the shift into the being of chief of staff. And I'll tell you, one of my learning in career and life is it's not the job role that defines you, it's you who defines the job
Correct.
that you get into. So depending on who you are, essentially you will make the job to be the most meaningful and the most learning slash rewarding part of your career, right? So um, I essentially this was the time when my own division grew from 350 people to 7,000, and IDC grew from if I remember 4,000 to 14,000 during this time. Um, this was like a stint of around 4.5 years, and this was the stint which was the most difficult also because this was the stint that was overlapped with COVID.
Yeah.
uh, the whole civilization just went through like a shock, and people, the whole work setup got reset when people got constrained to their home, and they couldn't figure out how to make the best balance between your life and your work, right? So um, I think a couple of things that helped me there was, I think, working with my leadership to figure out a clear purpose and vision for what we want to be as a development center. This was the time when we were going through when there was a need to kind of grow up India and support uh, our parent headquarter,
Yeah.
because we were looking at creating redundancy and scale outside of Seattle. So
Yeah.
we had to grow, and we had to grow, we had to hire, we had to kind of go build setups that would uh, help us create system, process, and people to that scale. When I got into this role, I never was expecting that this would actually go so much out of proportion. Before me, people had come there and they had kind of come in there, been there for like 2 years and retired. I came in there and this was like completely at the eye of the storm where there was so much of intensity going on.
Yeah.
Uh, so Also, what helped me was essentially building a diverse, empowered, and high performing team, which could work with me in order to make sure that we are working with a clear purpose and vision and solving the problems as we are going through. Um, the third piece of my focus was ensuring operational excellence and scalable structure, because this meant, especially more so during COVID, that we are very clear about doing cross geo communication, creating a robust organizational structure, creating a distributed development model. And I'll tell you, I think, I mean, this playbook is not public, but I think Microsoft has the most evolved playbook in the way different products are set up in partnership with different GDCs or global development centers across the world, and in partnership with our parent headquarters in Seattle, and how software gets built in a scaled way. Um, then operational rigor, making sure that we make employee experience be a center pillar for everything that we do. Help
Yeah.
get to a point where we had a setup that could scale. Now, along that journey, I think came the biggest challenge that we were facing, and this goes to your story of Noida,
Yeah.
right? Um, and this is where you have to, like, this was a time, by then I had already spent like 2.5 years as a chief of staff for IDC. So by this time, I think I started getting the pulse of the chemistry and the physics of humans. um,
Mhm.
so I realized that the managers, when they get into the midlife career, they were leaving Microsoft and they were moving away to North India to stay closer to their aging parents, so that they could assist them and support them. And we also realized, to grow as ITC, we needed managers, right?
Yeah.
And we could have hired from outside, but like, different ball game to kind of hire from outside, nurture them, because it takes years to kind of grow your people.
Yeah.
Um, and it also was the realization that it was a statistical anomaly that we had 6 out of 8 IITs in the North India, and we didn't have a presence.
Correct.
So, I mean, this is how the business case for opening up a development center in Noida was made. But again, I mean, because I think customer is always the king. So I optimize for hearing to them. So we did a um, tour, met the alumni, met the government, made a choice between Noida and Gurgaon. And like, Noida and Gurgaon choice is not easy. I mean, it
Yeah.
was very counterintuitive when we were making this choice. It might, in hindsight, seem 2020, but we decided to set up a shop in Noida.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, getting back the managers was easy. Hiring also was easy. Our biggest challenge was culture.
Yeah.
When you hire at scale, um, and when you have people coming in from all sort of background, all sort of diversity and demography, you cannot just set the culture overnight.
Yeah.
And that's when we realized that our culture scores were tanking. And this is where I'll tell you, I think I used a formula that we as Indian and Indian kids would probably understand. Uh, so to fix the culture, we turn towards Panchatantra. Have you heard of Panchatantra, man?
Yeah. Like,
So Panchatantra are these like ancient stories,
stories.
yeah,
Exactly.
which are where the animals are the character, and each
Hmm.
stories actually end up implanting a value education for the kid, right?
Yep.
So what we did was we created these culture stories, uh, which were real stories. We universalized them by using animals as the mascots and figurines, and um, we socialized it by having the manager leaders begin to talk about it, create videos, put it out there. I'll give you an example. The mascot for this title we call leadership in action was this v-shaped formation um, uh, of the geese flying in the sky. um, and when there's a science behind it, when these goose flies, uh, they actually always fly in a formation because the aerodynamics of the formation actually helps them move faster with a lot more
Correct.
efficiency. But the guy who's on the front takes the biggest load, so they keep changing the position. And this was our story for how we need to be as leaders, because it has to be rotation, it has to be inclusive, it has to be about each other. And leadership at scale and collective leadership was essentially our call out for a setup which is one for all for one, and how together we succeed and individually we fail. So this was the biggest challenge, and this is how we solved it. And by the end of an year and a half, we saw upsurge in our culture
Yeah.
score. And Noida as a center um, grew faster than any of our other centers across the world
True.
on that. So that's how I'll say. I think Microsoft in India kind of was set up to scale during those tough times.
Amazing. Like your whole journey is so inspirational. We all have so much to learn. And I was just thinking about, like, while you were just telling us the whole story, I was just thinking about a guy who might watch this video, who might be in IIT Bombay and, 19-year-old, and still in this kind of situation where he's thinking that if he should start his own company or, do a job. I would just like to know your take, and maybe if you could, inspire them or just give them a suggestion, like that how one should find what they're good at. I know that it's an individual journey, but still that because we are now in a similar situation, like you said, 9/11, we are now going through so many wars, and there's a lot of uncertainties, and like while people are ambitious, they want to do their own startups and ventures, they're still thinking about doing a job, and but still having a FOMO. So because you have such an amazing, and diverse experience, you're the best person to guide us through or maybe give some advice for this. So yeah, if you would like to.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I think very deep, relevant, and timely question, Bank. So thank you for asking that. Um, we are living in a very interesting time because the whole job setup or talent setup is kind of evolving. Even we as Microsoft are figuring out um, the right setup or the right mix for this new future, which is going to be AI enabled, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it's a combination of COVID, AI, and the whole um uh, like the financial slowdown in
Okay.
combination that we are seeing. Um, so One thing I'll say, I think, is the foundation that uh, that everyone should think about as they think about how they are set up for future. I think one thing is, make it be about yourself,
Mhm.
not about others. So have an inner scorecard um, on which you holistically and honestly are measuring yourself. Don't use the yardsticks defined by others to measure your success. For example, don't see and look around and see कि शर्मा जी का बेटा क्या कर रहा है या बेटी क्या कर रही है. It's always about you. Compete with yourself. Figure out what your passion is, what your calling is. Are you getting better over and over again?
Yeah.
Second thing I'll say is, have a vision for yourself. I mean, the early part of your career, the reason why I think so animatedly shared about that was because I had a vision. I had a, and then the destiny kind of came together to manifest it.
Yeah.
Similarly, I'll say I think destiny is with everyone. In fact, your unconscious brain is constantly conspiring to make your dreams a reality. But most of the problem is, most of the time we don't have our genuine dreams. We are
Yeah.
either borrowing dreams, or we are kind of confused, thinking about 100 things. Have your own dream, go after it. I'm telling you, I'm guaranteeing you that it will come to realization. um, it may take time, but as long as you're persistent, it will be your reality. So that's the second thing. Third thing I'll say is, focus on learning, because in life I've realized, and this is where our Shastra, Bhagavad Gita, or Puran, all of them are like equivocally, they talk about this, that what isn't resolved will repeat.
Yeah.
Which means, if you're not focused on learning, if the same kind of experiences keeps coming back in your life, in your career, which means that you've not learned your lessons.
Correct.
And I can tell you, in my life, I mean, there was early part of my career where I was uh, in a loop, uh, because I was not learning from my mistakes. So
Mm.
focus on learning, have a vision for yourself, and make sure that um you are persistent in chasing it. Um, is what I'll say. It doesn't matter where you want to be an entrepreneur, or you want to take a job, or you want to take a job and then be an entrepreneur, or vice versa. I think what is important is, what is the journey of self actualization, which is driven by your own inner scorecard. There will be success, there will be failure, but life is a marathon. Optimize for the marathon. Sprints will, like, if you think they are sprints, it will make you tired. If you
Yeah.
think it is sprint, I'll also tell you, you will not focus on what matters the most to you, which is your family, which is your health, which is your longevity, which is your ethics and reputation. When you think life is a marathon, you will focus on those, because that's the foundation on basis of which everything else will be built. So
Correct.
that will be my advice, man.
Thank you so much, Sandeep. Like, I think some of these advices even I need to hear. So, uh, thank you very much. It was great having you here. Thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing your experience. Yeah.
Thank you, Mank. It was
Th-
a pleasure being here, sharing my journey, and connecting with your audience. I love to hear any feedback, any thoughts that your audience has. Engage with them, do a follow
sure.
up. I'm on LinkedIn, so people can reach out, connect with me as well. So thanks a ton for facilitating and doing this, Mank, and
Sure.
your passion, your energy, and your kind of kindness showed through. Because one thing I'll say, and
Mhm.
you can keep it, you can edit it out of the podcast, is, I think my realization over the year is that word runs on kindness and gratitude. And we don't hear much news of such common events.
Yeah.
You go request people, you ask them for help. I'm telling you, 99% of the time they will relent and they'll help you.
Yeah.
um, and this kindness, I think, is something that we should pass along, and make this world a beautiful place. I'm committed to it, Mike. Thanks a ton for doing it.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.